Shalom, Akim Shabbat, Shalom, give our honor, our praise, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aqua that we listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I just wanted to do a continuation on this topic I've had called Give Your Strength Unto This Woman. Speaking of wisdom, not speaking about an actual woman here, right? So essentially the topic, is basically just a play on words in regards to a precept that's spoken about in the book of Proverbs, right? A lot of times, as young men, we make the mistake in giving our strength onto actual women, right? And I'm not saying I haven't done that, but the point really is, to essentially give your strength more and leaning more into the avenue of wisdom, right? And when you go through Wisdom of Solomon, I believe it's the seventh chapter as well as the eighth chapter, and I believe that also the 10th chapter, and many others as well. You start to see the importance of it, and particularly some writings in Proverbs as well, where wisdom is heavily praised and heavily discussed as the form as a woman, right? That is actually giving you comfort, right? Because our people don't seem to see the value of it. They don't seem to, essentially they kind of they hiss and they sort of gnash their teeth at actually seeing the importance of wisdom, because their understanding in trying to achieve some type of sovereignty, it only lies in acquiring physical wealth, right? And while that is part of the case, our people's minds haven't been properly rinsed out properly, right? When you read, there was something that Yahushua specifically said. He said that man should not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeded out of the Most High, right? So knowing these things, our people don't seem to value those important things, because they strongly want to attain one, but they strongly also simultaneously lack the other, right? And it's not like the Heavenly Father, through his begotten Son, through his prophets, to be able to give them a certain well and understanding of wisdom, through his prophets, because as a matter of fact, I'll start there. I might have mentioned it in the last lesson, but the Lord, is extending a sentiment of mercy, towards our people, right? This is Proverbs chapter 1, verse 20, and it says, "Wisdom crieth without, and she uttereth her voice in the streets. She crieth in the chief place of concourse," so a place where business is constantly being conducted. And it says, "In the openings of the gates, and in the city she uttereth her words," saying, "How long, ye simple ones, will ye love simplicity? And scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge," right? So, our people are in a state of actually being fools because of the way they actually live, because they don't understand the importance of actually having wisdom to be able to properly guide them, especially in the midst of enemy territory, right? To understand who you are, understand your enemy, understand how your enemy fights. And that's one of the things, that's information you're going to get, from the prophets, because you're not going to get under that type of understanding from your leaders. And the scriptures say that the leaders of the people, they have caused you to err, right? And a good example of that was a couple of years ago when there was that whole demic situation, and a lot of our people, they were taken by that so-called Fauci ouchie, I'll say it like that, because They didn't understand. Well, basically, the leaders, the so-called, these celebrities of our people, they have taken, they got paid, and essentially they have left their people to as essentially as a flock to the slaughter, right? So I'm just using that as one example, but you know, this is verse 23, and it says, "Turn you at my reproof, and behold, I will pour out my spirit upon unto you, and I will make my words known unto you," right? So the Lord makes his words unknown unto us through really his servants, the prophets. That's his mouthpiece of how, the Lord speaks, right? So, this is really just showing that the Lord actually provides. This is actually seeing the prophets on, the highways and byways through, first and foremost, starting with our apostles, is this really a sentiment of mercy, right? Um, I wanted to just continue. I just wanted to read this quick snippet here in Wisdom of Solomon, the 8th chapter, just in regards to this point about wisdom being likened unto a woman, right? And I want to read verse 17 here. Well, I'll read verse 1 and verse 2, just to establish the context. And I want to jump down, and it says, Wisdom of Solomon 8 and 1, and it says, "Wisdom reacheth from one end of the other mightily, and sweetly does she order all things. I loved her, and sought her out from my youth. I desired to make her my spouse, and I was a lover of her beauty," because you understand that, you know, um, through this understanding, essentially it broadens your mindset, and you get an understanding of how the Lord actually, thinks through these laws, statutes, and commandments, of course, right? And our people don't see the value in that, because going back to that point, our people see the for example, the laws, the commandments. They see those things as something that is grievous. They see it as something as a burden. They see it as something that, you know, um, they see it as shackles, right? And to an extent, it is, but it's the Lord is doing this because, the Lord really and truly knows best, and his ways are higher than our ways, right? And his thoughts are not our thoughts, right? To roughly paraphrase. So knowing these things, certain, like for example, like the dietary law, knowing these particular things, that it's not just about the Heavenly Father, through his begotten Son is trying to be, um what's the word I'm looking for? Trying to punish us in a sense that, through these laws, like following the laws, so to speak, is actually for our development, understanding that, and it's also for order's sake as well, because when you understand that and go even deeper, you understand that certain creatures are simply just created just for the purpose of maintaining the welfare and a certain ecosystem. And so it's not just about eating everything that is on the on the planet. Not everything is designed to be doing that. There are certain animals, for example, you have like vultures and so on and so forth. These sorts of animals have a strong type of like stomach acid, so it actually is it's essentially designed just to be the Earth's natural cleanup crew when you have lots of dead carcasses. So a carcass essentially like is a dead animal, right? These, the Heavenly Father created these specific animals to do these particular things in order for the earth to be properly maintained, right? So that's really the importance of getting that insight and knowing wisdom. But our people see it as rather something that is grievous, and we show our love by actually keeping what the Lord actually says to do, right? So this is verse 17. I want to jump down here. It says, "Now when I considered these things in myself, I pondered them in my heart, how that to be allied unto wisdom is immortality," right? And that's really starts first and foremost with actually having a fear of the Lord, right? And that's really the beginning of wisdom and its immortality. And it's true, because when you look at the way our people conduct themselves, going back into the point in regards to the commandments, when you look at the way they conduct themselves, you realize how short their lifespan is, right? The when the Heavenly Father specifically created, and gave us these law, statutes, and commandments, it was essentially to lengthen, our days by following these rules, right? The ways of, as the scriptures say, that the wages of sin is death. And what is sin? Sin is a transgression of those particular laws. It's not supposed to be seen as something that's grievous. It's supposed to actually be seen as something that's actually for our benefit. But our people are just very undisciplined and very, very stubborn, so they don't see the importance of it. So following and having that wisdom actually really leads towards, immortality. So, when you go to, when you reflect on, for example, on Hebrews, the 8th chapter, it actually outlines that, the Israelites would be properly, be in a state of immortality, because they're going to be in a state where they're never going to go off, because they'll be perfected, right? Because the laws will be in their inward parts, right? So because that's really why we our lives are really cut short, is really because of sin and disobedience, right? And I'll read verse 18 here. And it says, "In great pleasure is it to have her friendship, and in the works of her hands is are infinite riches." And that's true. There's always nuggets and information you can always extract. First and foremost, understanding not the prophecies, right, and also understanding the way the ancients actually did particular things, understanding that was a better way rather than Esau. Because our people, another example, think of it like this. A lot of our women, they go to school, and men too, but predominantly the women, they go to these institutions to so-called acquire, I can't even say pseudo wisdom, I just have to say to knowledge. They go there to be to be enlightened, right? And now when they get out, they think having those certain degrees, the masters, the PhDs, the bachelors, so on and so forth, they have some type of riches. But what you really have, you don't even have an understanding of your heritage as a whole. And now people don't seem to understand and see the value in knowing your heritage, knowing that the ways of your forefathers and how they conducted themselves while they were sovereign, and also while they were in captivity. People don't see the infinite riches in that, but rather when you go to those schools, it's basically like, it's essentially, how do I describe it? It's essentially kind of like riches that fade away, if you really think about it. It's not infinite, it's not overflowing, it's dead riches, so to speak. Because what you're really learning is ways of death. You learn about like, for example, like feminism and so on and so forth. That's why, as when Paul said to the Israelites in Corinth, "I've espoused you to one husband, that you may be chaste and be pure," because all those different philosophies that you learn in school, it trickles down to our women, and thinking that those ways are better for our people, right? But those ways, got us, as the scriptures say, through her is the beginning of sin, and through her we all die, to roughly paraphrase, right? Because Eve was, she was seduced by that serpent, when you go back into the story of Genesis, and Adam was also eating up that fruit as well, right? So this is verse 18, continuing on, and it says, "In the exercise of conference with her prudence, and in her and talking with her a good report, I went about seeking how to take her to me," right? So, it just shows the importance of wisdom. And also, as more and more, you know you find, the scriptures gives you a better way of how to actually conduct, life upon earth, right? How the earth is supposed to be ran essentially in righteousness. And when you look at the ways Esau conducts the earth, you realize the pitfalls. You realize the mistakes. You realize the consequences of pride. You realize why certain things have to be done. You realize why there needs to be a land Sabbath. Everything, it's a trickle down effect, because it just has bad, you know, um, he promotes bad policy. He promotes death. He promotes that ill will towards your own people, because he doesn't even treat his own people with a certain level of care. He disregards the importance of the poor. I'll give you a good example. So, in our laws, we have customs such as cleaning grapes. Now, when you go into it, back then when we were in the land, the if you had, for example, like say for example, you're a man and you have your substance and you have a vineyard. When you have that, you don't, when you're doing your harvest, you don't glean all the corners of your land, right? You leave a little bit of portion, for those who are essentially less fortunate. So, for example, you might have strangers, Israelites that were sojourning in the land. They may not have had the substance like you have, but also you may have had also widows, so women that lost their husbands, right? You might have orphans, so children, I should say, that lost their parents. So essentially that was a blueprint of a social welfare system where, okay, you made sure by keeping that law, you understand that the welfare of others then also need to be taken care of, who are less fortunate. And what happens in this society? You look at the society as a whole, and you have essentially a niggard who's running the society, right? And the scriptures talk about that. Riches are not comely for a niggard, because what happens? You just hoard all the resources for yourself, and you're not regarding the importance of the less fortunate, regarding the importance of the poor, right? So, just to show the importance, of having wisdom, right? Let me go here. This is First Kings chapter 3, verse 6. And Solomon said, Thou hast showed unto thy servant David my father great mercy, according as he had walked before thee in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart with thee. And thou hast kept for him this great kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. And now, O Lord Yahweh Bashim Shai, my power, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father. But I am but a little child. I know not how to go out nor come in. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, a great people, that thou cannot be numbered nor counted for the multitude. Verse 9. And it says, Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people? And the speech pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked this thing, right? So, this is a situation where Solomon is now, he's ascending the throne. David has essentially passed. And now it's a moment where Solomon has he has prayed, for wisdom, right? And to show you how shallow our people are, as well, because I have to equate it to them as well. They they always pray for the earthly things rather than the actual spiritual things, right? And the scriptures also, talk about how, riches don't profit in a day of wrath, but righteousness can deliver from death, right? So how do you understand how to actually be righteous, if you're not following the Lord's ways, right? So are people, even more and more time again, you see the way that they behave towards one another, and you realize, like, this is why a lot of their lives are cut short, because there is no righteousness, in them. Essentially, as it says in Ezra, they essentially have a loathe for the law, right? So a loathe essentially is it's a strong dislike. I loathe that. They don't see any profit therein, for their welfare, right? So so one of the things Solomon here he prayed for, was, more understanding, to be able to discern between the good and the bad, and to be able to properly, judge, make judgments, right? To be able to rule over the people, essentially in righteousness. So, and then eventually he goes on to actually, build the Lord's house. He has an encounter with the Queen of Sheba, and she was very taken, by Solomon's arrangement. The way the servants were arranged. And because scriptures say that, wisdom maketh, a man's face to shine, right? So, just to see that arrangement, people will look at you very, very differently, because you walk in a particular manner that's not is not in alignment, with, the vibration of this world, because it just changes the way you conduct yourself, right? And that is one of the things, the Queen of Sheba, when you go to the 10th chapter, she noticed about King Solomon, right? So so this is something, we strongly is boasting that we understand it and we know it, Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, right? So I guess I'll leave off with this last one, here. Let me see. This is First Timothy 4. Because it really goes back to the woman, giving our strength unto this particular woman, speaking of wisdom here. And it says here, verse 13, it says, "Till I come, give attendance to reading, to exhortation, and to doctrine," right? So, that's, just, reading more, often, and researching and being able to edify, other brethren, right? To comfort other brethren with these words, right? So, anyways, I just thought I would just do a small continuation in regards to this topic of, of giving your strength, unto this woman. And because it's what's going to give us comfort, in the midst of all this hell and these situations, right? It shows you the importance and the benefits of having, wisdom. So I'll just leave the lesson there, but Lord's will, this is edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.